right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this uni series, Fintech 101. My name is Nick Belvo. I'm the head of marketing at Fintech Canes, and I'll have the pleasure of being your host this evening to moderate the panel and introduce our first speaker who will come up soon, the executive director at Fintech Canes, Lael El Hadi. So as you are all joining, I'd invite you to say hi in the chat. Say hello, and I'd love to know where you're listening in from. I'm out here in Montreal, Quebec, so I'd love to see who else is perhaps in Quebec or Toronto or across the country. Please let us know in the chat. So if it's your first time here, welcome. I'll start off by quickly introducing Fintech Cadence. So Fintech Cadence is Canada's fintech hub. We've been around since 2017 as a nonprofit organization, really helping fintech startups and anyone interested in learning more about financial technology from coast to coast to coast. Our mission is really to develop future fintech leaders, and we do that in three ways. These are our three pillars, which are one, education, support, and collaboration. And these break down through our different programs and events. So we have three flagship programs, and actually a fourth that I'll speak about. We have the certificate program, which is 12 weeks where you get to learn about fintech with industry experts who come in to be able to share their knowledge, as well as startup founders to meet with you in a classroom setting or this year in a Zoom setting to explain what they do. We have Ascension, which is an incubation program for fintech startups. We're actually running our fourth cohort right now with 15 startups part of it. We'll be having our demo day coming up in about 2 months, which should be a really great event. And I invite you, if you're interested in learning more about these startups, to tune into that. As well as the Formathon, which is an opportunity that might interest some of you. It's Canada's biggest fintech competition. Essentially, it's a 3-week open innovation hackathon where we get challenges from our partners, and you pick a challenge, form a team, either with people you already know or with people you will meet during the Formathon, and essentially try to build out the best solution possible. The winners of the Formathon for each track, each team will be awarded $5,000 cash prize. It's the biggest prize we've ever had per challenge, so it should be a great virtual edition of the Formathon, and we'll dive into a bit more of that later. And lastly, the fourth program, we just acquired an organization out of Toronto called IFH Lab. And this is similar to Ascension program, but focused on fintech startups that focus on financial health of Canadians. On top of our programs, you also have a number of events. Fintech Drinks is an event that we are hosting 5 times this year. It's free to attend. We'd invite you to come in. It's a bit more high level than what we'll be speaking about tonight, but it really brings together all of our fintech community around a panel and networking with a fintech career fair. So if you're looking for a job in fintech, or if you eventually will be hiring people in the fintech field, we invite you to check that out. And last but not least, our uni series, why we're all here this evening. This gives you kind of a quick glance, timeline-wise, because we have a lot going on throughout the year. But the certificate is going on right now, as well as Ascension, like I mentioned. University series in tandem, which will lead up to our Formathon kicking off in May. We also have a uni series in the fall for the fall semester, and a French certificate for the first time this year. Donc, si vous parlez français, on va avoir le certificat en français cet automne, and the next English certificate will be back in winter 2022. So now for the first part of this presentation, I'd like to welcome the Executive Director of Fintech Canes, Lael El Hadi, who will be speaking about fintech, its history, and upcoming trends. How's it going, Lael?
That's going well, Nick. How are you doing?
Doing good, Happy to be here for this uni series. So I'll let you take it away, and I'll see you a bit later.
Thank you very much, Nick, and welcome to everybody. We're really excited, as Nick mentioned, to have you guys here. I have the pleasure today of talking to you about fintech and introducing you to the world of fintech. So I'm really happy to be able to do that on a wonderful Thursday evening. And I will say, Nick asked earlier on, where is everyone located? I'm representing from Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. So if there's anyone from Saskatchewan or the prairies, would love to see that on the chat as well. So for the next little while, I'm going to be introducing, like I said, the principles or the early high-level views of what fintech involves. If you already know about fintech, if you're pretty experienced in it, I would encourage you to put your thoughts in the chat, engage with us, let us know what you're thinking. If you have any questions, I am more than happy to take the questions. I'll keep my eye out on them as well. As much as possible, would love to have this be a conversation. I know we're in webinar format, but would love to see some of your questions come through on the panel, the Zoom chat, excuse me, as well. So let's dive into fintech and what fintech is. Not only do we obviously in our organization believe that fintech is one of the most exciting sectors to be involved with here in Canada and globally, we also really believe it's a cornerstone of the Canadian economy and for Canadian consumers as well. While we do think it's very key, we're not very creative in the fintech sector when it comes to labeling. So for the most part, if you've never heard of fintech, fintech is the amalgamation of finance and technology. And we often will start by stating a good example is online banking, mobile banking. Those are really early stage examples, or most people have interacted with those forms. And that's how we start looking at and defining fintech. As we develop and go through, of course, fintech becomes more complicated, has more layers. But for you to know, any technological integration of a financial service, we and Fintech Cadence and in the ecosystem will classify that as a fintech service or product. But fintech has and is consistently adapting. When we first saw about 5 years ago fintech start, it really was centered on the finance sector, making, like we said earlier, providing consumers with mobile banking, digitizing different services that are offered in the financial sector, helping with payments processing, helping with loans, and providing alternative loans to different consumers as well. Now we're seeing that change quite a lot, and we're seeing that different organizations in different sectors are starting to become involved. So we look at, in the pharmaceutical sector, fintech is starting to enter that. In the business world as well, as we initially started, and of course, in one of the other economies that are pretty predominant here in Canada, and especially in Saskatchewan and Alberta, the agricultural sector. But where does fintech really begin? Jumping the gun here with the slides, but where does fintech really begin? And we look at it oftentimes in 3 different waves. The first wave, as you see, is the introduction of infrastructure in financial services. And that's where we start talking about the transatlantic cable, Fed wires, credit cards. That really is the beginning of the infrastructure that we see that started to help with the wave of fintech. Now we're talking in the 1800s and 1900s. So we're really looking backwards here. We start getting a bit more updated when we start looking at the fact that fintech wave 2.0 is really being pushed and incentivized by banks themselves, whereas infrastructure was being pulled by government and different factors of countries. We really see the second wave being pushed by financial institutions directly. The introduction of ATMs, digital stock exchange, SWIFT, which is the transfer of payments across different institutions, and of course, the beginning and introduction of online banking. Now, you're probably wondering what wave are we in right now and how far back are we going to go and how far forward are we going to look into? Well, we're currently looking at the fact that we are in wave 3.0 of fintech. And that's because we look at it being pushed and started by the startups here. Now, Fintech 3.0, or the wave Fintech 3.0, really gets instigated around 2008 with the financial crisis. Why? Well, there was a lot of damage being done in the financial sector, as you guys know. Canada was lucky we didn't get hit as bad as other countries. We know the United States got hit pretty badly. We know there was a lot of factors that were involved in the 2008 financial crisis. But how this impacts a new wave of startups? Well, we often know when there is economic crisis, entrepreneurship becomes stronger. But really what we saw was there was a lot of individuals who were working in financial institutions at the time who were laid off because of what was happening, but who still had the talent, knowledge, and skills to develop solutions in the financial sector. And so they went off to build their own startups. And that's where we start seeing a huge wave of fintech startups start to develop. We also start seeing the introduction of Bitcoins. Of course, it doesn't, I don't think will surprise anyone. Of course, that's around the same time where smartphones really start becoming more dominant and solutions becoming more complex that are being provided on cell phones as well. So it's no longer your emails and your calls. I'm old enough to remember where it was just that basic, but it also starts including being able to access the internet, being able to check your email on the browser, etc. And that opens up a whole new world of solution development as well. And then lastly, in Montreal specifically, we also see a huge conversation happening around artificial intelligence. And so with all of these factors, we see a wonderful wave of 3.0 beginning and developing in fintech. Now, some of the things to keep in mind as, well, why is it important to know what wave we're in? And why is it important to keep in mind how we've gotten into that specific perspective? Because we also need to know where it's developing. Nick mentioned earlier that we're having a Fintech Drinks event happening, and we'll be sending you more details on that. Our first topic of Fintech Drinks is going to be talking about, well, everything is fintech. And that really starts to show you how fast this sector is growing and how many opportunities are within that sector. So now we come back to where we are and we say, okay, we're in Fintech Wave 3.0. Well, what brought us here other than the financial crisis, et cetera? We also see 4 main triggers that have really helped consumers also accept and start utilizing some of these services that are being offered, as well as financial institutions and other companies utilizing it from a business perspective. And the 4 key triggers we look at is, well, more and more as technology advances, we become more comfortable with it. So you remember, of course, the introduction of the smartphone or the expansion and the scaling of smartphone usages. Well, now it's not only everyone now around me has a smartphone, but everyone is comfortable you doing all of their business on smartphones as well. The second thing is technological developments. I mentioned artificial intelligence, but as we also saw, we're talking about blockchain and the emergence of cryptocurrencies. We're seeing a lot of different technologies that are now accessible to people so that they can develop solutions for them, as well as businesses as well. Internally, we're also seeing financial institutions have conversations around, well, how can they ensure that their products are up to date, that they're being innovative? And so we start seeing them look at fintech startups and say, well, maybe we want to work with some of these companies in order to build better products for our specific customers. And we see that through a lot of different examples, whether it's Flinks with National Bank, which I'll talk about earlier, or Mocha with other financial institutions as well. And last but not least, customer expectations. We see more and more that consumers are demanding a specific customer experience when they interact with different products. And so now, not only do I have access to all of my information on my cell phone, how come I can't open my bank account on my phone? How come I can't download an app where I can see immediately how much money I have in my bank account? Now, I'm being very rudimentary in explaining some of these, but it's just to give you the idea that these 4 triggers are now helping with this wave that we're talking about and really expanding the sector and really helping build what we're calling a stable fintech expansion in products and services. We mentioned the 4 main uptakes of trigger. Well, now, as we all know, we're experiencing this new wave, which really I have to say, I think a lot of us are dealing with in different ways. And we're trying to see as well, from our perspective as an organization, is how is COVID really impacting the financial sector or the way that consumers interact with their financial services. There is negatives and positives. We know that a lot of students are hard hit. We know that paying back loans is going to be a bit difficult. We know that there's a lot of focus in insurance, and not only life insurance, but health insurance, et cetera, with what's happening with COVID. And so we're also keeping our eye out on how COVID is going to play a role with introducing or pushing specific components of the financial sector. As we look forward, we ask ourselves, what's coming up next? And I think now we're probably entering the wave. And I think, it depends on who you talk to. We might have already entered it, or we might be entering a 4.0 version of fintech. And that's really led by what we've classified as tech fins. As I mentioned earlier, not the most creative in the name and titling of what's happening in fintech, but tech fins really is looking at technological firms that are starting to provide financial services. So, and I'll give you some examples here, but we see Apple, obviously a tech firm, coming in and introducing Apple Pay, entering the financial services. We see Alipay as well, Uber, and the most infamous Facebook when they started building their own cryptocurrency at the time called Libra. They've adapted since. Why is this really important? Because financial institutions have long looked at fintech startups as potential challengers, except that through time, they've realized the best way to move forward as an industry is to actually start working in hand in partnership with these startups to help in the innovation of the sector. Later on, you'll be hearing from two founders of startups that will talk to you about what that really means for them as well. But just as we look back here, we now see that financial institutions, while looking at the FinTech 4.0 wave, are looking at are looking at technological firms and asking themselves, are these companies that we can work with the same way we worked with FinTech startups? Or are these going to be more competitors? Are they going to really shift the way the financial sector looks completely? And is this something for us to keep our head up above the ground so that we're also up to date from the perspective of financial institutions? And as you see on the slides, we'll look at the way the financial sector might be dismantling by looking at an unbundling of the financial services offered by a bank, for example. And Amazon is the best way to look at it from a technological firm on the impact that it's having. It's taken components that a bank offers bit by bit and offered it into different ways. Insurance, no worries, we can offer Amazon Protect. Payment services, we can offer Amazon Pay Code, or infamously Amazon Go. For those of you who might have heard in the news or are interested by that, it's a really cool concept that they have that they've been playing around with for a few years. Amazon Go is the idea that you can go into a shop, take what you want and leave, and you don't have to wait in the register or pay. You do have to pay, but you don't have to wait at the register. You just go and through the scanning process on your phone, you will be charged for the product that you take out of it. So really a seamless experience. And that's starting to compete with the payment services that financial institutions offer. We're looking at credit cards. Amazon also has partnerships with Amazon Prime Visa, Amazon.com through their store card, and the Credit Builder store cards as well. So now you really see that technological firms, through different models, are able to capture some of these services that financial institutions are offering and are really going to be shaking up what the financial sector looks like in general. Canada's financial sector is traditional and conservative. So we see them that they're also really paying attention because this is a huge shift from what they're normally used to there. I want to give you guys a very quick example to look at, well, what do we talk about FinTech? Not only the excitement of it, but how does it look like when technological firms enter? And I want to give you the example of Apple Card. I'm going to show you a very quick video to show you the seamlessness, the brilliance of design and user experience that technological firms can actually provide. And I want you, while you're looking at this video, to think of the bank that you're banking with and ask yourself, can my bank attract me as well as the way this advertisement for Apple Card is? And at the same hand, ask, are they offering me the same services that I would get with Apple Card? Or is the service that they're offering a better service? Sorry, guys, and I think there's you'll have to excuse me. Okay, well, as that loads up, perfect. So be able to see it here.
This is Apple Card, a credit card created by Apple, not a bank. So it's simple, transparent, and private. And it's the only credit card designed to take advantage of the power of iPhone. It works with Apple Pay, so buying something is as easy as, and unlike other credit cards, it helps you easily understand your spending. It's all right here, by week, by month, or by category. And if there's a transaction you don't remember, Apple Card uses maps to show you where it was, like exactly where. Let's talk about rewards. You should get them today, not a month from today. That's why Apple Card gives you daily cash with every purchase. It goes straight to your Apple Cash card so you can spend it, just like cash. No points, no, how do I redeem this again? Time to pay your balance? Check this out. Apple Card makes the interest you pay clear and transparent. Pay off a little, the interest is this much. Pay more, that figure goes down until there's no interest at all. A credit card that encourages you to pay less interest, imagine that. What you won't pay are fees, because Apple Card doesn't have any fees, not even hidden ones. Apple Card sets a new level for privacy and security. Apple Pay technology creates a unique card number for you and then locks it away in the secure element of your iPhone. And with Face ID and Touch ID, only you can use your Apple Card. Got a question? Just send a text. It's that easy. You don't have to wait on hold or remember your mother's maiden name. And it all lives in the Wallet app on your iPhone, so it's always with you. But if you happen to be somewhere that doesn't accept Apple Pay yet, there's this. Titanium, laser etched, and no number. Nice. This is Apple Card, a new kind of credit card created by Apple.
Perfect. So this is an example that I wanted to give you guys of really what does the sector start to look like, as I mentioned. And what I would love to also see, and what I encourage you guys to ask as our speakers come on from the panel, Jennifer and Patrick, to ask them comparatively the way they're building their startup, what does that look like? And how as well do they view technological firms that are coming in to offer financial services? Now, perfect. Next, I want to touch on verticals. When we talk about verticals, we're really looking at the subsegments that fall under fintech. The same way we say accounting or we say financial institutions and insurance firms fall under finance, we're looking at, well, how does the fintech sector split up the different elements or the different components that it functions within it? And we have lots of verticals. So be prepared and don't be overwhelmed at the next slide that you see. But you see here the number of verticals that operate within fintech. Sometimes they match really nicely with the way we break down the financial services, and sometimes it's introduction of a new service in there. For example, you know that insurance firms fall under financial services. InsurTech is the newest version that we talk about when we look at insurance firms and the new services that they're offering. Property technology, as you see here, is the introduction of managing real estate services under financial services segment. So you can see the difference between a traditional sector that applies in finance and in fintech, and a new one that applies in fintech perhaps by itself. And so you'll see all of these verticals that we operate in, and I'm going to touch on the ones that are key in Canada, but I also do just want to highlight 2 or 3 of them for your references. And again, happy to take any questions if there are any that you see on the screen that you're interested in hearing more about. And the first one I'll start talking about is investment tech. So we will often hear about a lot of services. If you've listened to the news in the last month or so and heard about Robinhood, Robinhood would fall under investment tech, a solution that's offered under investment tech. Investment tech really is the application of new services in supporting consumers in their investment strategies. So you'll see the investment tech portfolio there. Like I mentioned, Robinhood is a good example of that. Another one that I would like to mention is RegTech. So RegTech is the introduction of technological services in the regulatory landscape, one of the key components of financial services and one of the key things that impacts fintechs as people are building within that as well. Cryptocurrencies, now that's a popular one because a lot of you guys must have heard of Bitcoins, maybe Ethereum, maybe you guys have some of those, and if you do, and you got in early, congratulations, you guys are really capitalized on that as well. But of course, you know, the cryptocurrencies are a growing field, and you know, with Elon Musk, with what he's saying, it's really interesting to keep your eye on it as well. The last one that I'll give as an example is ESG, and that's the integration of solutions that address environmental, social, or governance companies as well. And that's the sector that we're going to start seeing grow quite aggressively over the next few years. We know in Canada, responsible investing and responsible finance has become really a dominant component from the banks themselves, and the government has been pushing strong incentives to help start building more solutions around responsible investing. And of course, consumers are just becoming more and more aware and more demanding in the kind of products that they get, rightfully so, that have more of a moral and ethical standing that aligns with their personal beliefs. So those are the verticals that I wanted to highlight. Like I said, if you have any questions and you want to know more about any of the verticals, I'm happy to address that and take them with you. I have my eye on the chat as well. While you guys look there, I also want to start introducing you to, well, what does the Canadian landscape really look like? Now, Canada is a really dominant sector, a really dominant player in the fintech sector. Of course, there are countries that are larger, that have a bigger ecosystem. We look at the United States, for example, the United Kingdom, Europe, China, Singapore as well, all have very strong fintech ecosystems, and with the Middle East and Latin America really developing and growing as well there. But why is Canada a strong player, and why does Canada have a strong fintech landscape? Well, because we have a lot of financial institutions and a lot of financial firms that provide a good blanket for people to start innovating in. We have around 88 banks. We have close to 430 lending organizations, about 110 insurance firms, and 375 different funds. So if I'm looking at the financial sector and I'm saying, is it robust enough? Do I have enough opportunity to be able to disrupt? Do I have enough opportunity to be able to create innovations that I can actually apply and provide to my consumers or to businesses? Well, like I said, the blanket is really wide, and that really incentivizes a lot of the solutions that we see now being provided. There are about 1,000 fintechs, and we say 1,000 because, of course, it depends on the day and it depends on the time that it ranges. But there's about 1,000 fintech startups in Canada. And I do want to just caveat by saying, when I say fintech startups, I also mean scale up. So if you've heard of Wealthsimple, they're way past the fintech startup stage. They're not so young. They're more in the scale up stage, but we do count them as part of that. So you can look at 1,000 fintech companies, really is the better way of saying that. 50% of those companies are based in Ontario. I don't think that will surprise many of you. Biggest financial sector in Canada, one of the biggest in North America, largest population. So it really has the formula to be able to be a strong ecosystem, followed by Quebec and British Columbia as well. As you saw on the chat, we do have Jen from New Brunswick. And so we're also keeping our eye out on different regions that are growing and are going to be taking on, taking on and providing more solutions. I know out of the Atlantic region, Jen, as a shout out, we also saw Verifin just get acquired recently for a couple of $2 billion. So we're seeing that that ecosystem is growing. Also, like I mentioned earlier, I'm based out of Saskatchewan for now, and we're also starting to see startups evolve from the Prairie region out of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba as well. So keep your eye out on those regions. It's just to say that now the makeup and the breakdown of the startups really does focus on Ontario, Quebec, and BC, but with other more exciting regions as well coming up. In terms of the verticals, so as you remember, the different sectors that are within fintech, we see that Canada dominates mostly and has dominated in the payment sector. By virtue of the way solutions have been provided in the past, our payment sector is really robust and even more advanced than some of our neighboring countries and other countries that I mentioned that are pretty strong in the fintech ecosystem. Followed by lending tech. So that's technological solutions provided in the lending space. Insurance tech now is becoming a strong vertical here in Canada. As you know, we talked about what are the triggers of innovation, what are the triggers of fintech? Well, one of them was going to be COVID. Because of what's happening with COVID, a lot more people are conscious of their insurance. Are they covered? Are their family members covered? What does their life insurance look like? So as that happens, we also see a very old and traditional sector in the insurance firms. And so it really helps and creates, again, incentive for people to come in and try and disrupt it by providing newer and more innovative solutions. And that's why we're seeing the insurtech vertical really speed up and really develop and grow. And as I mentioned, investment tech, so you'll have companies that we'll see, and some of which we'll talk to today as well, that are within that sphere. Other ones that we see that I'll mention very briefly, of course, we have cryptocurrency, Ethereum, Bitcoin, Ethereum obviously coming out of Ontario. We also have ESG, as I mentioned earlier, reg tech, so that again, reminder, regulation and technology. We're starting to see that Canada is developing strong solutions within the reg tech space. It follows the UK and Australia for being leading examples there. And last but not least, one thing I'll touch on is cybersecurity. So with the movement of everyone working remotely and just in terms of the complicated and more advanced structure of challenges that we're seeing, cybersecurity has become a really vital sector in the finances as well. Some Canadian fintechs for you guys to know. If you haven't heard of these, then I'm excited to be the one to introduce them to you. And if you hadn't, if you've interacted with them, I hope you've had a great experience. I'd love to hear about some of the ones that you've worked with, some of the ones you've interacted with. You can put it on the chat if you've heard of some of them before, but I'm gonna just touch on them very quickly. So Shopify, that's probably the one that's the most popular. At some point you would have heard or interacted with, if not Shopify, but a company that's using Shopify in its back end. So Shopify being a payments system for online retail. We have Mocha, formerly Milo. They're a company that helps you save your money by rounding your money to the nearest, your purchases to the nearest dollar. For example, if I go to Starbucks and I spend $4.15, then it will round up the rest of the money and put it in an account and then save it for me. So Mocha is really looking at helping different consumers get introduced to investment and supporting their savings as well. Flinks is more of a back-end system, and I'll give them as an example as well, because we, again, while you might not have interacted with Flinks, if you've interacted with Mocha or Wealthsimple, you've interacted with Flinks. And Flinks is what we call an API aggregator that works on the back end, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail later. And of course, we see some other great successes. I mentioned Verifin being acquired from the Atlantic region. Wealthsimple, yes, Nick, Wealthsimple is a great company. We also have Lightspeed and MobiWave as really cool examples of Canadian startups that are creating waves, not only here in Canada, but globally as well. So you guys are coming to the series. You want to know a bit more about FinTech. You hopefully have now got a good understanding of what we talk about when we talk about FinTech. You're starting to understand the verticals and what it's made up of. You're starting to get an idea of the Canadian landscape. The question becomes, well, who are all the players that form the FinTech ecosystem? How can you personally interact with them? Have you interacted with them? Where do the opportunities lie? And that's where we see this makeup of the stakeholders in FinTech, specifically here in Canada. So the ones that I've talked the most about right now has been financial institutions and services. For you guys to refer, it's basically the banks that you operate with, or here I give an example of Desjardins, Royal Bank, Bank of Montreal, all of those would fall under this specific stakeholder. The next player that has a strong role within the FinTech ecosystem is venture capital and investors, really anyone providing capital to help the development of the FinTech landscape. Luge Capital is a really great example and a company that we at Fintech Cadence work very closely with, in that they focus only on FinTech investments, and they help FinTech startups from the early stages up until Series A and above. The next one is regulators. Now, I know many of you may not have a lot of interactions with regulations, but as I mentioned, and maybe Jennifer and Patrick later, our panelists later on will touch on them and the importance of regulation in FinTech. But regulation really is one of the core components of how to ensure you're building a successful solution in the landscape, especially in a country like Canada. And so regulatory bodies play a very strong role within the landscape. And here I'm giving the example of the Autorité de Marché Financier, which is the regulatory body in Quebec. Next, I'll go to service providers. So you can't have an entrepreneurial ecosystem without having service providers that help and support that. That includes legal firms, an example here, Fasken Martineau, one of our partners. It also includes accounting firms, EY, for example, and other firms that provide services and support to the startups and FinTech companies as they're growing and scaling up. Next, incubators and accelerators. Of course, you are here with one of them, Fintech Cadence. We're really organizational ecosystem builders that's trying to help the whole ecosystem with the services we provide. We also have another example of an accelerator, which is Holt Accelerator, that also helps companies develop. We then, two last ones before we wrap up there, we also have community organizations. And so you'll see we have here, for example, the National Crowdfunding of FinTech Association. Excuse me, I always get the acronyms mixed up. And they're an organization based out of Ontario that's really looking to help and develop conversations around FinTech challenges there. And last but not least, of course, we have the corporate sector where, and the corporate labs that help also spur and incentivize innovation, specifically Deloitte Greenhouse, Desjardins Labs are all really great examples of those different stakeholders. So you see the ecosystem is quite robust. There's lots of different players. If you're just entering it for the first time, then this is a really good map for you to look at and say, I want to enter FinTech. What are the different areas that I can start getting involved in? And then you can start diving in a little bit deeper and starting to understand what each of those players are doing and where you personally fit in or don't. And if you already know about these players, that's great. It's time for you to start asking, how can I connect to some of them? Fintech Cadence, I want to become more involved. How do I become more involved with our stakeholders? Last but not least, and I'm going to wrap up quickly because I know my time has run out, is I want to touch very, very quickly on technologies that are currently impacting FinTech. Here is another large list of all of the different ones. I'm sure there's a lot of words on here that you guys have heard before. Virtual reality, yep, it impacts FinTech as well. Artificial intelligence, quite dominant, especially for those of you guys who are in Montreal. Blockchain, I've touched on that before with cryptocurrencies. Big data, big topic, a lot of things happening around that. That's my mom joke for the day. And so big data is also having a lot of impact with the way people are able to access their information and their products. So you'll see there's quite a lot of technologies that are really impacting the financial sector and helping drive and spur and create new companies by utilizing these solutions. I'm going to touch on 4 very quickly. The first one is big data and AI. So we're starting to see fintech solutions that utilize big data and utilize different components of artificial intelligence. I've mentioned Wealthsimple before as an example. Hard Bacon is another one that uses robo-advisors for portfolio management. And I'm also going to use owl.co as an example, which is doing solutions that providing solutions for businesses to help you know your customer more. So when a customer comes in, it helps provide the company with various touch points so that it can verify that user. And it utilizes different components of artificial intelligence, machine learning, et cetera, that helps it gather that information on the users to provide the solution, to provide their verification to the companies that the users are signing up for. The second technology I want to touch on is blockchain. So like we said earlier, many of you might be familiar with cryptocurrencies, but I also want to show you 3 other examples of how blockchain is impacting the fintech sector. The first one is auditing. The more and more people are using and buying cryptocurrencies, the more is the need and the conversation around, well, are we auditing them the same way we would audit them if they're getting a salary? Are they claiming taxes on it, etc.? And that opens up a whole new field around there. Catalaxy is a branch of RCGT, a large accounting firm. So you see that they're now also considering how can they do crypto auditing. We also have crypto market data, Consilium Crypto, one of our friends of Fintech Cadence, that also look and see how can they gather this data and start providing better advices around it. And last but not least, wallets around cryptocurrencies, Trezor being an example of a wallet that you hold. Cryptocurrencies here, and cybersecurity, another form of technology that's really developing in the fintech space. So we see Flare systems, and they're using SmartNet intelligence to support and identify fraud within teams and companies. And as well, Sisana, which utilizes detection of suspicious activity within different employees. So that's more of a business-to-business solution that we see. Last but not least, and this one is quite becoming more and more dominant. Again, I mentioned Flinks. Another example of an API company, an aggregator collector company is Plaid. There's multiple companies that are trying to do the same thing. Very quickly for you, APIs are solutions that help gather data from users, financial institutions, for example, and provide it to a second party company so that they can use it to provide better advice, better investment advice, et cetera, as you see. And then I'll give an example, of course, some of you might have heard of Stripe. Well, there's Stripe Control, which is also doing API solutions as well. So with that being said, those are the different technologies that we see that are happening and being utilized in fintech. Like I said, it's quite an exciting sector to be involved in. If you're just entering for the first time, don't be overwhelmed. There's a lot of new words and a lot of new structures, but join it. It's a really, now I'm starting to sound a little bit cultish, but I'm saying take advantage of the opportunities that are available within the sector. It has been growing over the last few years and will continue to grow in Canada and has wonderful job opportunities and wonderful opportunities if you are looking to create your own business. And if you've heard of a lot of the things that I mentioned today, like I said, it's a good opportunity for you to connect with us so that we can show you how you can be involved. And Nick, before we leave for the end of the day, we'll be discussing a few opportunities for you to get involved in the fintech space. So with that being said, Nick, I'm going to hand the mic back to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lael.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great presentation. Great mom joke. And it was,
I had to throw one in.
Awesome. Well, now this next part is going to be great. We spoke about fintech, and now we'll have the chance to meet 2 fintech founders, Jen Legier and Patrick Dunn, respectively, from QUBER and Benefi. So Lael, if we could just stop sharing the screen, so then we could go full screen with our panelists. How's it going, Jen? How's it going, Patrick?
Great.
Hey, Nick, how are things?
That was an awesome overview.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
I think it introduces this next part really nicely, because now that everyone has an idea of the landscape throughout Canada, we'll be able to dive deep and give some concrete examples of some of the fintechs here in Canada, represented by the both of you. So maybe for anybody listening, well, everybody listening, if you have questions throughout, please don't hesitate, write them in the chat. I know we've said it before, but it's true, and it's a great opportunity to learn more from these two wonderful founders. But we'll kick it off high level. Maybe with yourself, Jen, if you could just tell us a bit about yourself and QUBER.
Sure. So QUBER, the problem we set out to solve with QUBER is that 50% of Canadians are living paycheck to paycheck. And the traditional budgeting tools that were out there were really doing nothing to change behavior. So it was showing you where you spent your money, but doing nothing to really make you do something different about it. And I have a background mainly in the gaming industry. I graduated in computer science, but then kind of went pretty quickly into the gaming industry. And so I wanted to take some of the things I learned in the gaming industry and really make a saving app that was fun and easy to use and really had a hook in there so that people got, I say now, addicted to saving, but really so they built that daily habit of saving.
Good problem to have if you're addicted to saving. I guess it could go on the flip side if you're really addicted, but okay, awesome, thank you. And Patrick, could you tell us a bit about yourself and Benefi?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey everybody, I'm Patrick Dunn. I'm founder of Benefi. Benefi is a transformative employee group benefit that improves the financial wellness of Canadians. And we do that by providing access to affordable loans, financial literacy and advice, and savings prompts. And the elevator pitch with me is I'm a career consumer insights, product development, and consumer research guy. I spent my whole career, helping other companies understand unmet consumer needs and create successful products and services to address them. And hopefully we're doing the same thing with Benefi.
Awesome, thank you. So I think what's interesting is you both have different backgrounds, and a lot of times when we think of fintech, we think of people who have a degree in finance or who are coming out as coders. Pat, let's talk about your background a bit more. How did you get into fintech and decide to launch Benefi?
Yeah, I for sure had like a non-traditional career path. Much of my roles have been focused around, looking for those unmet consumer pain points and helping solve them. And it's actually a pretty good practice for any burgeoning entrepreneurs in the audience. I recommend carrying around a little notebook and kind of noting down all the little pain points you encounter over the course of the day, be it poor customer service or it's a pain in the butt to do something, because sometimes those can turn into really interesting nuggets of opportunity. And that's essentially what my job has been for the last few organizations. My last role, I was an AVP of Innovation at Canada Life, where I helped that big company create new products and services and group benefits and financial services. And sometimes the collision, when you notice the collision of these big market forces, be it technology, consumer behavior, regulatory, or other things, the collision of these opportunities sometimes creates these little spaces where you can create something. And in our case, it was a couple of big factors in the marketplace, and things like the debt to income ratio and the debt service ratio, which basically mean, right now Canadians are carrying more debt and using more of our post-tax income to service debt than any other time in the history of the country. This is a multi-generational problem, which is getting worse. And the other thing that we thought was really interesting is that, in terms of what we do, the journey that somebody has in our financial institutions is very different depending on who you are. If you are wealthy, if you have assets and you have a well-established credit score, you have a certain journey. And the journey is, it's really easy to borrow more money at a very inexpensive rate. You can leverage your home equity line of credit to borrow at 3%. And it's really easy to get advice. Any financial advisor or planner, if you're sitting on a couple $1 million in investable assets, would love to sit down and talk to you about anything on your mind. And that experience is contrasted for other folks at the other end of the spectrum. If you're starting out in life or you're a newcomer to Canada, your experience is very different because in that scenario, you're what the banks would call an underserved. You have a thin file or no file credit score. Basically means if you want to borrow money, you can't. I mean, maybe you can put an expensive car repair on your credit cards, or you can go to an expensive new fintech, which will charge you 48% per annum, or God forbid you're going to a payday lender, which will charge you $460. And none of those are great for your long-term financial health. In the same sense, it's really hard to get financial advice and literacy that you can trust, which is tailored to you. Because the way most financial planners are incentivized, they sell you products, mutual funds and life insurance, and a bunch of other things. And if you're not in the market for those things, it's hard to really get advice. So it felt like a bit of an injustice that the most financially vulnerable among us essentially pay a tax for their financial situation. And that's something that we really wanted to fix.
Yeah, it's definitely a massive problem. And on the note of problem, I'd like to dive in, Jen, with you. It's funny, you started off testing QUBER with university students, and here we are at a uni series panel. Could you talk to us about the difference different generations might have as well, their relationship with money? Because obviously, depending on your financial situation, your relationship with financial institutions may be different, but the different generation themselves, how do you see differences in how they relate with money?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because we're right now doing a contest for International Women's Day. So we're getting, tips from people of different generations that have helped people learn how to save money or learn to manage their money. And one thing that I think is common across, my parents' generation or even older is that they always saved before they bought. So they weren't a generation of using credit cards and piling up a bunch of debt. Like I can remember when I was a kid, we moved into my house and the house it had a floor, but it didn't have flooring on top, right? So gradually, as my parents had money, they would continue to add more. And I find my generation, and I was one of these people actually, I built a house and I had to have everything perfectly in that house. You know what I mean? I had to have everything. And then I ended up getting probably a mortgage that really I should have got a smaller house and less things and I would have been just fine. So I think my generation, it was too easy to get those loans. It was too easy to spend money. Credit cards I remember getting a credit card as soon as I got out of university. The first thing I was offered was a credit card. So what I'm hoping now is that, and I feel, because I get this question a lot, is especially with QUBER, can my kids also use QUBER? So I feel like now people in my generation are like, okay, I don't want this to happen to my kids. So how can I start to teach them? What tools can I use now to help them learn how to save and teach them financial literacy? And I think schools are realizing this is important in their curriculum. So I'm hoping the younger generation now will be more educated on finances and start out, when they get done through university, start out on a better foot.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a lot of people don't know this, but when you look at the statistics in Canada, 50% of people live paycheck to paycheck. And it's really problematic, the level of debt some people could get into. You both have, so this is focused on Canada, but you both have international experience. Patrick, you work in Japan, and Jen, you doing an incubation program in Singapore. I'd be curious to know what you saw or your perspective on the relationship people in those countries have with money and their financial institutions. Is it similar or large differences? Pat, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, night and day. One of my jobs in Japan, I actually worked for like a market entry and consulting organization. So I helped other firms look into that market and look to succeed there. And the general advice we would tell people is like, Japan is like the dark side of the moon. It is a completely different market, and there's lots of organizations that have tried to launch a product there and have failed because they haven't understood how culture and consumer behavior is really different in that market. And and a great example is Japan. When a lot of people think about it, it's this kind of land of amazing technology and robots, but even from a financial perspective, still like super heavily cash based. Like you pay with cash all the time. It's the way business is done. So I mean, that creates some really interesting challenges and opportunities for any fintech which is exploring that space. And you've got this additional layer in terms of there's a certain taboo around money, where it's in some cases seen as this dirty thing, and it's not always great to talk about it openly. So there's a lot of nuance that any organization looking at that market needs to think about before entering.
Interesting. And Jen, what about yourself? What was your experience like in Singapore? Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I think so. When I started, it was back in 2016, and it was really interesting because fintech was really not a thing, especially in New Brunswick. I don't know if there was any fintech companies or what we would call fintech companies now. And I remember pitching in New Brunswick, and it was like nobody's ever going to share their bank account information. Nobody's going to do this, right? And now it's happening everywhere. And when we went to Singapore, it really was like the fintech hub. It was huge. That was like all that was talking about. The government was involved, the big banks, there was accelerator programs everywhere. And it was just such an eye-opener for us to see, the excitement and the difference. And I mean, it's like Patrick said, it was the level of technology there was just so much more advanced. I think the people expected more from the technology than maybe we did. I think we're getting there now. So I think it was like, we were a couple of years behind, maybe 2 or 3 years behind what they were doing there and what the banks were already doing there and offering to their customers. And the other thing that I noticed in Singapore was that people were really, really huge on rebates. So rebates and discounts were huge there. So anytime, like we didn't have that in our roadmap, but we always said if we went back to Singapore and launched, we would have to have a component with cash back and discounts and something, because you couldn't survive there without it.
I think that's super interesting because, a lot of the times when building a company, especially today, we have to think global first, but it's in the financial sector. From market to market, it changes based on psychology, habits, demographics, the realities of the average consumer wallet as well. And having that firsthand experience, I find it really interesting to hear. For example, I went to India for 6 months, and what shocked me was all payments were really done by QR code. There's just QR codes on all checkouts, and it's a company called Paytm that is massive over there that we've never even heard of. Now, QR codes are starting to be a thing with COVID, but before that, we would have thought, QR codes were simply dead. You mentioned your accelerator program. Now, QUBER is part of Ascension 2021, and Patrick of Benefi did Ascension last year. Could you tell us about that experience, Patrick? How Ascension helped you in any way, and what value you got out of it?
Yeah, I'm absolutely happy to talk about that. The timing is really good because we're raising a round right now. We're doing like a pre-seed seed round. So certainly pitching a lot of investors. And I got off a phone call with an investor like just now, and he's like, "Your pitch is really good." And that's not to toot my own horn. Our pitch has come an awful long way, and there are still a couple of flaws within it. But let me tell you, Fintech Cadence knocked the heck out of our pitch. It involved so much over the course of our engagement with that team. You get a ton of practice, a ton of feedback on running your pitch, evolving how you talk about your company, how you are sharing your value proposition. And that's like a precursor to people actually talking about the nuts and bolts of your opportunity. Beyond the pitch itself, people helping you think through and talk about the different aspects of your business, maybe identifying holes in your logic and your go-to-market strategy in terms of the problem that you're solving. It's incredible. The honesty in terms of evolving, not only your organization but how you talk about it is extremely invaluable. And beyond that, I mean, the network and exposure to folks across the ecosystem has been incredible. Without going into too much detail, there's been this one big thing which has been really a challenge for us to overcome as a fintech. And without going into detail, through connections within Fintech Cadence, we think we actually have that solved now. This huge issue that has prevented us from the launch that we wanted, I think is going away now because of a direct relationship with FinTech and us and the people as part of the ecosystem. So beyond the pitch practice, the connections just can't be beat. I would absolutely recommend it to anybody on the line today.
I'm super happy to hear that for you, Pat. That's great to hear, and I'm excited to learn more in the weeks or months ahead. Jen, so for you, you're in Ascension 2021. For those we didn't, I prefaced it earlier, but could you tell us a bit about your live experience and what you're hoping to achieve out of it?
Yeah, of course. So it's very funny that Patrick just mentioned that it helps with his messaging and his storytelling, because that's exactly what we're hoping. That's one of the things that we're hoping to get out of it anyway, is our pitch, and we've been actively working on it. So it's actually helping already. So I just recently, this week, has been working with a mentor that was introduced to me by one of the folks at Fintech Cadence, and she's doing wonderful things already with us. So I'm really excited to get that and put that all together. And just, the messaging helps not only with the pitch to investors, but it helps when we go to sell to financial institutions, when we go to sell to other organizations that we work with, and even just on our website, getting that messaging across for our users and really like honing in on what it is that we do. So that's been very helpful. And then of course, we're also in the process of raising money. So we're looking forward to meeting some investors through this and building our network and the different partners that we're looking to meet. So excited for all of that.
If there's any student VCs in the audience this evening,
yes, please.
People looking to raise rounds, great investment opportunities. I think it's interesting takeaways. One, the pitch is something really important to get down pat and master over time, and it's continuously evolving. But also, what we really see in the fintech sector is the importance of network and being able to meet the right people, because there's really high barriers to entry, especially a lot of the times your customer can be a bank or financial institutions, and these are large companies, and you don't know necessarily who to speak to. So it's really in Canada at least about who you know and going to knock at the right doors. And that's why programs like these, like Ascension, can help with that. So perhaps there's people in the audience that are, well, obviously they're interested in fintech. Fintech's very broad, and maybe they have a idea, but if they're in university and they're interested in starting a startup, what advice would you share with the listeners? Maybe, I don't know who wants to go first on this one. Patrick?
I can start. I'll revisit the earlier advice. Definitely take note and start documenting the pain points you encounter as a consumer as you go across the course of your day. Those are the nuggets of opportunity, things that are a pain in the butt for you to accomplish, things that are difficult to do, things that cause you stress. Not as an exercise to just bitch about these things, but actually to document, like, look, this is a problem that you might need to fix. So I would absolutely recommend that. The other thing I would recommend any entrepreneur, not just one out of university, mentally steel yourself for rejection. It's a tough gig. It's not for the thin-skinned. You get beat up a lot in this business, but I think as long as you're dedicated to your mission, your goal, and your outcome, you can overcome these things. But I think it's worthwhile, like, mentally recognizing that not everybody's going to get you want to accomplish. Not everyone will want you to succeed, but just mentally understanding some of those challenges in your way is definitely part of a successful journey, I think.
Awesome. Jen, anything to add on that front? What would you would have wished you known in 2016 when you were starting out?
Oh goodness, so many things. I think one of our big learnings is the sales cycle for financial institutions. So It is a long process to try to sell something to a bank. I would say probably a 2-year cycle. It can take a long time. So I think that was one of our eye openers anyway. But accelerators, especially if you're in fintech, find an accelerator that's fintech focused, like Fintech Cadences. And I think finding the right advisors and mentors is very important. So find people who get what you're doing. They don't necessarily have to agree with everything that you're doing, but they have to get it so that they can ask the right questions and help you along the way. And I think the last thing is that, which I think I didn't realize at first, but when you're running a startup, time is so difficult. You're in every different direction. So I think you need to learn to pick and choose what you need to do, because there's so many things coming at you. So I think it's important to really figure out what's valuable to you and take those on.
Awesome, thank you. I think that's some both great advice from the both of you. I know we're running out of time, so maybe just to wrap it up, is there any last things you want to share with the audience? Jen, I know you have a contest going on.
Yeah. Yes, we have a great contest going on for International Women's Day. We are giving away over $10,000 in prizes. So all you have to do is nominate a female in your life that taught you something about money. Head on over to our Facebook page. It is QUBERit, QUBERit. And also check out QUBER. I think that's one of the things that if you are interested in fintech, play around with apps out there, and we're happy for you to come on. It works with all Canadian banks, so check us out.
Awesome. And anything on your end, Pat, that you like the audience to know?
I don't think our news is nearly as exciting as Jennifer's. That's amazing, and I would absolutely support her contest. We're launching in a couple of months. As you guys graduate from school and are looking for employers, for sure look for an employer who cares about your overall financial wellness and wants to help you escape from consumer debt. And that's exactly what Benefi does. Be sure to ask for it in job interviews and salary negotiations.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for generously giving your time this evening to join us. Very much appreciated on behalf of everyone tuning in. And hope to see you both very soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for the time, Nick.
All right. See ya.
Bye.
So for everyone listening, if you're curious to learn more about Benefi and QUBER, Jen and Patrick actually came on our podcast, the Fintech Founders podcast, where we have a bunch of other episodes available. It's on Spotify. You could also find it, the video versions on YouTube and on our website. So invite you to check it out. It's 30-minute conversations with different founders that I've had the pleasure to interview. And you could learn more about what they do and some advice they share with other aspiring founders. Right, so Formathon is what we mentioned earlier in the presentation. And it's really an awesome opportunity if you're looking to get involved. Maybe you already have a fintech startup idea. Maybe you just want to learn more about fintech and want to find a way to get involved. This is honestly the best possible venue to do that. The Formathon kicks off in just about 2 or 3 months from now. It has 2 tracks. One is the startup track, which is really designed to build a fintech startup. And the other one is the research track. So if you don't have that entrepreneurial itch, but you're still really interested in financial technology overall, the research track might be better for you because it's more of a project-based approach versus having to build a company. It's a 3-week open innovation hackathon with over exactly $5,000 in prizes per team, per challenge. So you sign up teams of 2 to 5 people. You could sign up with friends you already know from school, or you sign up alone to the Formathon, and we'll have different networking events to be able to meet other participants, and we'll help you find the right skill sets to be able to make your team. Then over the 3 weeks, we'll have different workshops on Wednesday evenings and on Saturdays. So even if you're in school full time, it will fit your schedule, and will really help you to understand the problem, prototype a solution, learn how to pitch it, as we know that pitching is super important. And then finally, it'll end with the Formathon Finals, where it'll be an event open to the public where you'll be presenting either your startup or your research for the chance to win $5,000. We'll be hosting an info session on May 5th at 5 p.m. Eastern. So it's a while away, but in any case, you'll be getting an email tomorrow with a recording of the session and links to learn more about the Formathon. If you want to check it out right away, I think Karina shared in the chat the link. It's fintechhands.com/Formathon. And if you want to learn more about FinTech, the University series continues. The next two will be in French, and then we'll have others coming up throughout the season. But the next one is March 9th at 5 p.m. L'avenir de la finance et ses emplois, with two great speakers. But overall, we invite you to follow us on any social media of your preference. We're very active on LinkedIn, and that's really the main place where we post updates. So make sure to connect with us on LinkedIn. And on our website, you could also sign up for a newsletter to be able to be the first to know what's going on in FinTech. So I think that's it. Do we have any other slides from my tech team behind the scenes? It seems that we do not. Perfect. Well, that's it for this evening. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I will look here quickly. I don't see any questions. Hearing somebody raise their hand but lowered it. If you have a question, feel free. I'm going to stay connected for another 30 seconds before we wrap this up. All right. Well, I guess we're good. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. It was a pleasure having you here with us. And we hope to see you sometime soon. Have a great evening. Take care.